Pathologic 3, from what Ice Pick Lodge has shown so far, and what can be felt playing the demo, seems like a project that wants to re-explain Pathologic without losing its strangeness, only with a more direct language and more legible systems. It is scheduled for January 9th, 2026 on PC, Steam, with PS5 and Xbox Series versions promised for later, so the feeling is of a launch very focused on PC first, the way the series has always breathed better. The development context that comes across to me is of a studio that learned, the hard way, that Pathologic cannot just be a niche legend. It needs to be playable without being domesticated. The official positioning itself already sells the game as a psychological detective story with Daniel Dankovsky and a clear 12-day time frame. And this gives the impression that they are choosing a well-defined axis to sustain the chaos around it. The demo reinforces this intention to guide the player better without removing the moral tension. You decide who to save and diagnose accurately are not innocent phrases. They are saying that the suffering here isn't just atmospheric, it's a procedural consequence. And this, personally, really grabbed me because the series always had that diffuse cruelty of you are losing. And now it seems the cruelty also comes from you chose wrong, and we can point to exactly where. Another thing that was very clear in the demo is how they are treating the city as a character in an almost ostentatious way. This idea of impossible architecture of the town on Gorkin seems to serve as a technical showcase and also as a narrative tool. Playing it, you get that impression that the city doesn't just want to confuse you, it wants to lead you to wrong conclusions, as if the space were part of the interrogation. And then enters what, for me, is the most dangerous bet in a good way. Shape the town's future and rewrite the past. When the marketing itself places rewriting the past as a pillar, it seems the studio is saying, okay, you will fail, but the story will watch you fail and will use that. Which fits Pathologic perfectly, but it also opens room to soften the weight of consequence if this turns into a disguised undo button. The personal impression that remains is that Pathologic 3 is trying to be a Pathologic with more surgical intent. Less mystery about what the game expects from you, and more mystery about what the world is doing to you. If they manage to balance this discourse of psychological investigation, meaningful choices, and the promise of messing with time/past without it becoming a crutch, something could emerge that doesn't replace Pathologic 2, but dialogues with it in a bolder and perhaps crueler way. The story, from what has been disclosed and what the demo lets slip, seems to revolve around Daniel Dankovsky, the Bachelor, facing the plague as a solvable problem, until the world proves, repeatedly, that he is late, wrong, and alone. The official premise is quite direct. You have 12 days to try to save the city from the plague, making brutal decisions and diagnosing with precision, with the promise of rewriting the past in the middle of it all. The narrative hook that catches my attention the most is Daniel's initial motivation. He goes to the town on Gorkin looking for a supposedly immortal man, and when he arrives, that man is dead. To me, this sets the perfect tone for Pathologic. The story begins with a thesis, immortality, and immediately slaps you with an antithesis. The symbol of the thesis is already a corpse. In the demo, the feeling is that the story wants to put you in a psychological tribunal, not just a traditional survival horror. The marketing material insists on this line of psychological horror and holding on to your own mind while everything crumbles. So you can read the narrative as a character study. Daniel trying to maintain his scientific pose while the world demands human and ugly decisions. What I liked as a story idea is that the medical investigation, diagnosis, seems to be the game's way of telling you who Daniel is. Someone who reduces people to cases, symptoms, and variables. Until that fails. The official description itself places diagnose accurately side by side with ruthless choices. So the plot seems to force you to mix ethics and method, as if the main mystery wasn't what is the disease, but what do you become when you need to choose who deserves tomorrow? This talk of shaping the future of the town and rewriting the past has absurd narrative potential because it transforms regret into a mechanic and at the same time a theme. However, personally, that is also where my fear lies. If rewriting the past becomes just an elegant way to optimize routes, the story loses its scar. If it becomes a spiral of guilt and denial, then it truly fits Pathologic. Another impression the demo gives is that the story will be less about discovering a hidden secret and more about dealing with conflicting versions of facts, including from the protagonist himself. The marketing pulls hard on the thread of the psychological detective, and this, for me, suggests that Daniil is not a neutral camera. He is a dubious source, a guy trying to narrate the tragedy as a report, and contradicts himself as the city exacts an emotional price. The story of Pathologic 3 seems to me the most surgical of the franchise in the way it presents itself. Everything revolves around the Bachelor, the 12-day clock, and the plague as an inevitable stage. If the game manages to make rewriting the past hurt instead of relieve, and uses diagnosis as a dramatic tool, not just a puzzle, a narrative could emerge that not only revisits the town on Gorkin, but questions why anyone would think you can beat death with stubbornness and method. The gameplay in the demo makes it quite clear. It seems less about surviving by attrition and more about deciding under pressure, with systems pushing you toward clinical and cold choices. The official promise remains the same backbone: 12 days to save the city, make ruthless decisions, and diagnose accurately, while you try to keep yourself whole. The big star for me is the diagnosis loop. Interviewing, examining, crossing-referencing symptoms in the notebook, and closing a conclusion that binds you to that diagnosis for the rest of the day. The cruel detail is that the game seems to transform certainty into risk. You choose, lock it in, and only find out if you were right later, seeing if the death toll drops the next day. And this gives an absurd weight to every decision, because there isn't that comfort of immediate feedback. Another strong insight from the demo is that the plague isn't just a backdrop. It becomes a board that changes and forces you to move. In practice, the gameplay encourages you to go after information, even visiting the patient's house, crossing dangerous areas, because characters might hide symptoms or not be so cooperative. So the game places fieldwork as part of medicine. Daniil's mental system was what really got me. A meter between mania and apathy that you need to balance, and which, if it falls too much into apathy, blocks interactions, and can lead the character to take his own life. In terms of gameplay, this changes everything. It's not just HP and ammo, it's ability to function socially. And this type of bar messes with the way you think about every action, even when it's better to isolate yourself, use items/drugs, or do small things just to regulate yourself. Combat, from what the demo showed, continues to be purposefully bad in a pathologic way. Reloading is slow, the revolver is more of a threat than a solution, enemies are dangerous, and you can intimidate by pointing the gun even without bullets. But that doesn't hold up forever. And what makes this heavier here is the direct connection to the psychological state. Killing worsens your mental state, pulling toward apathy. So the gameplay punishes you not only with abstract morality, but with character functioning. You can also feel a structural change in movement. The demo indicates that the game is not totally open world as expected, but rather a model where you cross districts and choose destinations on the map, with real-time sections when the route passes through infected/unstable areas. I liked this direction because it cuts out dead walking and keeps the focus on what Pathologic does best: decision, tension, information. but still preserves moments of tense traversal when it really matters. The most mysterious element of the gameplay, and what could most define the game, is this idea of time as a resource and playing non-linearly, with the demo suggesting even jumps from one day to another, like going from day 5 to day 3. If this is confirmed in the final game, it gives the sensation that Pathologic 3 wants to be a puzzle of narrative and crisis management, only with that Ice Pick Lodge signature. Even when you optimize, you still feel you are losing something human in the process. Graphically, Pathologic 3, from what I could perceive in the demo, doesn't seem to want to compete with showcase realism, but rather with art direction that disturbs. And that is classic Ice Pick Lodge. The studio itself speaks of a familiar world made strange, as if the city were reconstructed in fragments, and this intention appears much more in the composition and atmosphere than in the quantity of detail per square meter. The first thing that stuck in my head playing the demo is how they use architecture and space to destabilize you. The marketing talks of impossible architecture in the town on Gorkin, and you can feel that places were designed to look wrong even when they are beautiful. It's not that ugly because it's old vibe, it's beautiful but with morally suspect geometry. In lighting and palette, the demo gave me a contrast I really dig. At the same time that everything is gray, dirty, and sick, there is a strange clarity in certain points, as if the game lets you breathe just to remind you that the air is still contaminated. This matches the sensation of psychological horror that the game page sells, because the terror doesn't come from jump scares. It comes from you looking at the scenery and feeling that it is watching you back. The interiors, for me, are where the visuals shine most. Wood textures, worn walls, objects that seem hand-picked to tell a story without needing narration. And the most important thing is that they don't fill the screen with decorative clutter just to look modern. Many rooms have a purposeful emptiness that gives that theatrical stage sensation, very pathologic. Regarding the characters, the impression is of a leap in finish compared to what many people remember from Pathologic 2. More legible faces, clothes with more materiality, and animations that, even if still a bit stiff, seem stiff by style and tension, not just limitation. Even so, the identity continues to be somewhat anti-naturalistic. No one there seems 100% like a regular person, and this helps maintain the strangeness. The HUD and visual interface elements are also part of the graphics here, because Pathologic always uses UI as language. From what was disclosed, the game leans heavily into the Bachelor's instruments: observe, examine, analyze the environment. And this tends to pull the presentation toward a more clinical look at times, as if you were placing a layer of science over a nightmare. My critique is that sometimes the city can get too pretty in certain snapshots, and there is a risk of this diluting a bit of that classic oppressive weight of the series, depending on how the days advance and how the plague paints the scenery. At the same time, if this beauty is intentional, a cleaner first act only to rot in front of you later, then it becomes a huge asset. The visual contrast becomes narrative. Performance is one of the points that divides opinions, especially between those who have powerful hardware and those running on more modest machines. The game asks for relatively accessible requirements: i3, Ryzen 5, GTX 960, 8GB of RAM, but the general feeling is that optimization is still raw, with reports of FPS drops, stuttering, and even instability in certain scenarios, especially in areas with many visual effects or in moments of higher psychological tension. Playing the demo, one can perceive that the game is heavy in certain spots. The map between districts and the sicker areas of the town on Gorkin demand a lot from the PC, and those running on laptops or Steam Deck might feel the hardware heat up, with some users reporting the need to lower graphics to maintain fluidity. Even so, on high settings and more robust machines, the game delivers a visually rich experience without glaring crashes. What caught my attention the most was the impact of visual effects and art. Direction on performance. The game abuses post-processing, fogs, distortions, and dynamic lighting, which gives that unique pathologic atmosphere, but is also the main reason for FPS drops on older hardware. It seems Ice Pick Lodge chose to prioritize atmosphere and immersion over absolute fluidity, which can be seen as courage or carelessness, depending on the point of view. Another relevant detail is that, at times, performance can change radically according to the character's mental state or story events. Some reports mention transition scenes or environment changes where the game stalls or loses stability, as if Daniil's own psychological systems were affecting the hardware. This might be intentional, but it could also just be a bug to be fixed by launch. For those playing on a modern PC, the experience is generally good, especially if you have an RTX 2070 graphics card or better and 16 gigabytes of RAM. In these cases, the game runs well at high resolution, with few issues, but can still have instability spikes in specific situations, like combat or map transitions. Controller support was also tested in the demo, and it works without major issues, although some users have reported the need for manual adjustments in the controls. This shows that the team is trying to cater to different profiles, but there is still room for improvement in optimization for portable devices. Overall, Pathologic 3's performance seems to be the demo's Achilles heel, but also the reflection of an artistic choice. Ice Pick Lodge wants the player to feel uncomfortable, and this goes beyond the story and systems, reaching even the hardware. If by launch they manage to smooth out the bugs and the most severe drops, a visually impactful and technically solid experience could emerge. But for now, it is better to play with adjusted expectations, especially if your PC isn't top of the line. The impression that remained for me is that it's worth buying on day one only if you already know you want to live this anxiety together with the community, and don't mind facing adjustments and possible patches in the first few weeks. The demo makes it clear that the game has strong ideas, but also that it might arrive with technical rough edges and balancing issues that usually improve later. For those more concerned with stability and comfort, I would wait. There are very recurring reports of stuttering, FPS drops, and inconsistent performance in heavier moments of the demo, mainly in infected districts. And even if this doesn't represent 100% of the final game, it is a sign that the polish could evolve fast after launch. At the same time, buying at launch makes sense for those who like games where the experience is kind of an event, because Pathologic 3 sells itself as 12 days of cruel decisions and medical dilemmas, and that is the kind of thing many people enjoy discussing, while discovering everything at the same time. The game description itself emphasizes significant choices, you decide who to save, and investigation/diagnosis, so it's a full plate for those who like to theorize and share discoveries. The game is indicated for those who like oppressive narratives, a rhythm of pressure, and systems that make you choose the least bad option, without giving you an elegant exit. The demo also suggests that the mental health mechanic, the extremes of apathy and mania, is central and can be quite punitive, so it speaks more to those who enjoy psychological tension and discomfort than to those who want a power fantasy. It is also indicated for those who enjoy observation and deduction gameplay, because the marketing insists on the role of you are a doctor in search of the truth, and on the act of examining, interrogating, and catching contradictions to reach a diagnosis. If the idea of spending time reading clues, talking, and building a line of reasoning excites you, the tendency is for the experience to fit well. I would not indicate it at launch, and perhaps not even after, for those looking for good combat, upward progression, and a constant sense of reward. The demo gives off much more of a vibe of you are always owing something than you are getting stronger. So if the goal is to relax or enjoy fluid action, the chance of frustration is high.